The afternoon sun streamed through thin curtains of Grace Matthews' cramped apartment, casting long shadows across worn linoleum. She sat at the kitchen table, a cup of lukewarm coffee growing cold in her hands as she stared at the empty wallet beside her breakfast plate. Inside that leather billfold, cracked and faded from years of honest work, lay two $20 bills and a 10, $50, the sum total of what remained after rent, groceries, and keeping their 15-year-old Honda running long enough to get her to work and back. Michael's wedding ring sat in a small velvet box next to the wallet, catching the morning light with a gentle gleam that reminded her of his smile. She'd been carrying it with her for 3 months now, unable to bring herself to pawn it, but knowing the time was coming when she'd have no choice. The ring represented everything they'd built together, everything they'd lost when cancer took him 18 months ago, and everything she was failing to provide for their son. 9-year-old Alex sat across from her, methodically eating his cereal while sketching in a notebook he'd found at a garage sale. The boy had inherited his father's artistic eye and his mother's steady hands, creating elaborate drawings of houses with big yards, tree houses, and rooms where a person could spread out without bumping into walls. He drew what he dreamed of: space, permanence, a place that felt like home rather than a temporary stop between disappointments. "Mom," Alex said without looking up from his drawing, "Mrs. Wilson says some kids at school are going camping this weekend. Real camping with tents and everything?" Grace set down her coffee cup carefully, recognizing the careful way her son brought up things they couldn't afford. Alex had learned not to ask directly for things, a survival skill no 9-year-old should need to develop. "That sounds like fun, buddy. What kind of camping?" "The kind where you sleep outside and cook over a fire and don't have to hear Mr. Reynolds upstairs practicing his trumpet at midnight." Alex's pencil moved across the paper, adding windows to a house that looked remarkably like the ones they drive past in the nicer neighborhoods across town. "I told her we probably couldn't go because we don't have camping stuff." The weight of those words settled into Grace's chest like a stone. Alex had stopped asking for things months ago, but he hadn't stopped wanting them. The camping trip, the baseball glove he'd admired in the sporting goods store, the bicycle with working brakes that would let him ride safely with the other kids. Grace worked as a mechanic at Martha's Auto Shop, a job that barely covered their basic expenses, but allowed her the flexibility to pick Alex up from school each day. The pay wasn't much, but Martha's understanding was worth more than money some days. The knock at the door came just after dinner time. Grace opened it to find Eleanor Cooper, their 68-year-old neighbor from across the hall, holding a newspaper folded to show a circled classified ad. "Evening, Grace. Hope I'm not interrupting," Eleanor said, her eyes sparkling with energy that belied her age. "Just saw something that might interest you." Eleanor had been their lifeline since Michael's death, watching Alex after school when Grace worked late, bringing over casseroles on bad days, and offering the kind of practical wisdom that only comes from living through your own share of hardships. "County tax auction this Saturday," Eleanor continued, pointing to the ad. "Properties with unpaid taxes going for next to nothing. My Harold bought our first house that way back in '72. Grace scanned the listing, her attention caught by the last item. Rural property, 2.3 acres, includes structure described as cabin, back taxes, $50, minimum bid $50. "Probably a dump," Eleanor said with a knowing smile. "But sometimes dumps are where you find treasures." She squeezed Grace's arm. "Just thought you might want to know." "You're too clever by half not to make something of an opportunity like this." After Eleanor left, Grace stood at the window, watching the sun set behind the apartment complex across the street. $50 was all she had left in the world. Spending it on a dilapidated cabin in the woods was exactly the kind of desperate gamble that could leave them with nothing. But as she turned and saw Alex asleep on the sofa, his notebook open to a drawing of a house with a tire swing and room for a dog, she wondered if staying safe was really keeping them safe at all. Where are you listening from right now? Have you ever had to take a chance when everything was on the line? Share in the comments below if you've faced a moment when $50 stood between you and a dream. The county courthouse steps buzzed with quiet energy. Grace found herself among a modest crowd of maybe 30 people, each clutching auction sheets and wearing expressions that ranged from confident calculation to desperate hope. She recognized her own expression in the latter group. The families and individuals who saw this auction not as an investment opportunity, but as their one chance at ownership. The auctioneer, a weathered man named Carl Hendricks, climbed onto a makeshift platform with a portable microphone. His voice crackled to life, cutting through the morning air with the practiced rhythm of someone who understood that behind every bid was someone's dream or someone's last resort. Grace's property was number 47 on a list of 52. She watched as houses, empty lots, and small commercial buildings went to investors with deep pockets and quick decisions. Each successful bid reminded Grace how outclassed she was in this world of real estate speculation. Number 47, Carl announced, and Grace felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Rural property, 2.3 acres, includes structure described as cabin, back taxes $50, minimum bid $50. A murmur rippled through the crowd. $50 was unusually low, even for a property in poor condition. This property is located on Pine Ridge Road, approximately 12 miles east of town. Access is via unpaved road. Structure reported in severe disrepair with no utilities connected. Buyer responsible for any environmental or structural issues. Carl's description was thoroughly discouraging. Do I have an opening bid of $50? Grace's hand trembled as she raised it. Her bidder number 63 felt heavy in her grip. I have 50 from bidder 63. Do I have 75? The seconds stretched like hours. Grace scanned the crowd, expecting someone to outbid her with casual ease. But the other bidders were consulting their papers, many shaking their heads. A cabin in severe disrepair with no utilities and difficult access wasn't attractive to most investors. $50 from bidder 63. Going once, going twice. Carl's gavel hovered in the air. 75, called a voice from the back. Grace's stomach dropped as she turned to see a man in a clean work shirt and new boots. This was it. Grace had exactly $50. She couldn't go higher. Her dream was about to end $25 short of success. She looked down at the drawing Alex had given her that morning, the picture of them smiling in front of their cabin, and felt something break inside her chest. Then she remembered Michael's ring. Her hand moved to her pocket, feeling the small velvet box. 100, she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. Carl's eyebrows rose slightly. I have 100 from bidder 63. Do I have 125? The house flipper was studying his auction sheet more carefully now, probably reassessing the property's potential. The silence stretched for 30 seconds, then a full minute. $100 from bidder 63. Going once, going twice. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Sold to bidder 63 for $100. The next hour passed in a blur of paperwork and the surreal process of handing over Michael's wedding ring as collateral while she arranged payment. The county clerk handed Grace the deed and a set of keys that looked like they'd been cut sometime in the 1980s. Congratulations, Ms. Matthews. You're now the proud owner of 2.3 acres and whatever structures are on the property. The previous owner was a woman named Catherine Blackwood, who lived there until the mid-1980s. Property's been abandoned since then. Grace stared at the keys, old tarnished brass with the kind of weight that suggested they'd opened many doors over many years. As she walked to her truck, deed and keys in hand, the reality of what she'd done began to settle in. She owned land. She owned a home, however broken it might be. But she had also committed them to a project that might be beyond their means to complete. What if the cabin was truly uninhabitable? What if the cost of repairs exceeded what they could manage? What if she just spent their last $100 on a problem too big to solve? The drive to pick up Alex from school passed in a haze of excitement and terror. When she saw her son waiting by the entrance, Grace felt her doubts dissolve into determination. Alex climbed into the passenger seat and immediately noticed his mother's expression. "Mom, you look different. What happened?" Grace held up the keys, watching Alex's eyes widen as understanding dawned. "We got it, buddy. We got our cabin." The joy that spread across Alex's face was worth every dollar, every doubt, every risk. For the first time in 18 months, her son looked like a child who believed in possibilities again. "Can we see it? Can we go there right now?" Grace looked at the clock on the dashboard. 3:30. They had maybe 3 hours of daylight left. "Let's go home," Grace said. And for the first time since Michael died, the word home referred to something that actually belonged to them. The dirt road to their property devolved into 2 tire tracks, separated by a ridge of weeds for the final stretch. Grace's Honda bounced and scraped over roots and stones, the undercarriage protesting with metallic complaints. "This is like a real adventure," Alex said, gripping his door handle. His excitement was infectious. After 20 minutes of careful driving, the trees opened into a small clearing, and there it was, their cabin. Grace stopped the car, and both of them sat in silence, taking in their first real look at what they'd bought. The structure stood like a forgotten memory in the center of the clearing, partially hidden by decades of aggressive vine growth. What had once been a modest log cabin now appeared to be wearing a green sweater of ivy, Virginia creeper, and wild grapevines that had claimed the walls, roof, and most of the windows. The front porch sagged at one corner, where a support post had rotted through, and several roof shingles had surrendered to time and weather, leaving dark patches that promised leaks. But it was theirs. Alex was the first to speak. "It's bigger than I thought it would be." Grace studied the structure with her mechanic's eye for problems and potential. The log walls appeared solid despite the vegetation, and the stone chimney stood straight and intact. "What do you think? Buddy, still excited about our new home?" Alex opened his door and stepped out, his sneakers crunching on fallen leaves. "It's perfect, Mom. It just needs some help." As they approached the front porch cautiously, testing the floorboards before putting their full weight down, a woman's voice called from the edge of the clearing. "Well, I'll be. Someone finally bought Catherine's place." They turned to see an elderly woman making her way toward them with the help of a carved wooden cane. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes sharp with intelligence. "Ruth Wilson," she introduced herself, "live about half a mile down the road. Been wondering when someone would take on this old place." Ruth explained she'd been neighbors with Catherine Blackwood until her sudden disappearance in the late 80s. Brilliant woman. Worked for NASA back in the day, retired early to focus on her own projects. Folks in town thought she was eccentric, but she was just ahead of her time. "Do you know what happened to her?" Grace asked. Ruth's expression grew thoughtful. "One day she was here, the next she wasn't. Left everything behind. Some said she had a breakdown. Others claimed the government came for her because of what she was working on." She shrugged. "All I know is she was kind to me when my Frank passed, and whatever drove her away must have been serious for her to abandon a home she loved so much." As Ruth departed with a promise to bring over a welcome basket, Grace fitted the brass key into the front door lock, surprised when it turned easily despite its age. The door swung open with a groan of hinges that hadn't moved in years. Afternoon sunlight slanted through gaps in the vegetation covering the windows, creating a green-filtered twilight. The main room was larger than their apartment's living room, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and built-in shelves flanking it on both sides. "Mom, look at this!" Alex called from near the fireplace. He was kneeling beside the built-in shelves, running his hands along the wood grain. "Some of these boards are loose." Grace joined her son and examined the shelving. Several of the shelf boards could be lifted out, revealing gaps where smaller items might have been stored. As Alex lifted one of the longer boards, something crackled beneath it. "There's paper stuck under here," Alex said, working the board free carefully. What emerged were several sheets of aged paper, yellowed at the edges and covered with handwriting in faded blue ink. The pages appeared to be journal entries dated from the mid-1980s. Grace held the pages up to catch the filtered light and read the first entry aloud. March 15, 1987. The work is nearly complete. 23 years of research, and I believe I have finally solved the fundamental problems that have plagued the field since Tesla's early experiments. The applications are extraordinary, but I fear the implications if this knowledge falls into the wrong hands. I have decided to document everything and secure it properly. If something happens to me, perhaps someday the right person will find it and understand what needs to be done. Grace continued reading. The government representatives came again today. They are persistent, these people who want to classify my work, to lock it away in some vault where it will benefit no one. They offer contracts and veiled threats in equal measure. I have told them nothing, but I know they will not give up easily. I am not a young woman anymore, and I cannot run forever. Who do you think wrote this? Alex asked, peering over his mother's shoulder. Someone named Catherine, Grace said, remembering what the county clerk had told her. Catherine Blackwood. She used to live here. They spent the next hour exploring the cabin more thoroughly. In the back bedroom, they found built-in drawers that still contained a few items. Old clothing, a pair of reading glasses, a small toolkit that looked well used but carefully maintained. The loft area proved to be a single room with slanted ceilings and windows on both ends. It would make a perfect bedroom for Alex. As the afternoon sun began to slant lower through the trees, they sat on the front porch steps, sharing a package of crackers. The clearing around their cabin was larger than it had first appeared, with mature oak and maple trees providing a natural border. So, what do you think, Alex? Is this the kind of place you imagined when you were drawing those pictures? Alex leaned against his mother's shoulder, a gesture of contentment that had become rare since Michael's death. It's better, Mom. In my drawings, it was just me and you. But this place feels like it has stories, like it's been waiting for us. Have you ever discovered something unexpected that changed your perspective? Something hidden away that seemed meant just for you to find? Our journeys often take surprising turns when we need them most. Saturday morning arrived with the crisp promise of October. Alex was already sketching detailed plans for clearing vines and organizing tools. I figured out a system, Alex announced as his mother poured coffee. We start with the front of the house so people can see we're making it nice. That's smart thinking, buddy. What about the inside? That's phase 2, Alex said with the seriousness of a project manager. First, we make the outside look good. Then we work on making the inside livable. They loaded the Honda with every tool Grace owned, a modest collection of wrenches, screwdrivers, a hammer, work gloves, and a small stepladder. From their meager savings, she'd managed to buy a set of hedge trimmers, a tarp, and basic cleaning supplies. When they reached their clearing, the cabin looked more hopeful in the golden morning light. Alex attacked the vine removal with enthusiasm, carefully untangling Virginia creeper from around the front windows, while Grace worked on the heavier growth covering the porch roof. Mom, look at this, Alex called from beside the front door. He had cleared enough vines to reveal a small wooden plaque mounted beside the entrance. The wood was weathered, but the carved letters were still readable. Blackwood, 1962. Catherine built this place herself, Grace said, running her fingers over the carved letters. 25 years before she started writing those journal entries. As they worked, they began to understand more about the woman who had lived there. The cabin had been constructed with unusual attention to detail. Joints fitted precisely, logs carefully selected and matched, windows positioned to capture maximum light while maintaining privacy. By noon, they had cleared the front wall completely. The afternoon was spent working on the interior, sweeping out years of leaves and debris, washing windows, and beginning to assess what needed repair versus what needed replacement. It was while cleaning the main room that Alex made his next discovery. He had been working on the stone fireplace, using a brush to clear away years of soot and debris, when he noticed that one of the stones seemed different from the others. This one's loose, he told his mother, wiggling a stone about the size of a brick that sat at shoulder height on the left side of the fireplace. Grace examined the stone and found that it could be removed entirely, revealing a small cavity behind it. Inside the hollow space were more papers, but technical drawings this time, rendered in precise detail with notes in the same careful handwriting they'd found under the floorboards. The first drawing showed what appeared to be an electrical circuit, but unlike anything Grace had seen in her years working on car electrical systems. At the bottom of the page, in Catherine's methodical script, were the words Resonance Frequency Amplification System, Prototype 7. "What is it, Mom?" Alex asked, peering over his mother's shoulder at the intricate drawings. "I'm not sure. Some kind of electrical invention. Your friend Catherine was apparently quite the engineer." He pulled out a small metal object wrapped in oiled cloth, a component that matched one of the elements shown in the circuit diagram. The piece was beautifully machined with tolerances that spoke of professional precision. "She wasn't just designing these things," Grace said quietly. "She was building them." During the drive home, Alex was uncharacteristically quiet. "Mom," he finally said as they reached the paved road, "do you think Miss Catherine is still alive somewhere?" Grace considered the question carefully. "I don't know, buddy. The journal entries were from a long time ago, but I think maybe she left all those papers and drawings for someone like us to find." "Someone like us?" "People who would appreciate the cabin, who would take care of it, and maybe understand that her work was important." It was their third weekend working on the cabin, and they'd made remarkable progress. The front and east side of the structure were now completely clear of vegetation, revealing solid log walls and intact windows. The distinct sound of an expensive car navigating the rough dirt road reached Grace before she could see the vehicle. The sleek black SUV that pulled into their clearing was as out of place as a diamond in a box of rusty nails. A tall man in his 50s stepped out, dressed in a tailored suit. "Vernon Miller," he introduced himself, extending a manicured hand. "Chairperson of the Town Council and CEO of Miller Energy. I heard someone finally bought old Catherine's place." His smile didn't reach his eyes as he continued. "The council sent me out to perform a safety inspection. This property has been abandoned for decades, and we have concerns about structural integrity, potential environmental hazards, and code violations." Grace gestured to the work they'd already completed. "As you can see, we're making improvements. The structure is actually quite sound once you get past the cosmetic issues." Vernon nodded absently, his attention shifting to Alex. "And who's this young man?" "My son, Alex," Grace answered, noting how Vernon seemed to be cataloging everything about them. "Quite a project for a single mother," Vernon observed, his tone managing to make the comment sound simultaneously sympathetic and judgmental. "Must be challenging to manage renovation work on top of your regular job." Before Grace could respond, Vernon pulled out his phone and began taking pictures of the cabin and property. "Just for the council records," he explained. As he completed his tour of the exterior, Vernon's demeanor shifted to something more businesslike. "I'll be honest with you, Ms. Matthews. This property presents numerous compliance issues. The structure predates modern building codes, there are no utilities connected, and the access road doesn't meet emergency vehicle standards." He paused, letting the concerns sink in before continuing. "However, Miller Energy has been looking to expand our clean energy demonstration sites in this area. I'd be prepared to offer you $150,000 for the property. It would save you the headache of trying to bring this place up to code, which frankly might be impossible on a limited budget." The offer hung in the air between them. $150,000 would solve every financial problem Grace had faced since Michael's death. It was rational, sensible, and exactly what any financial advisor would tell her to do. Yet she hesitated. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Miller, but we're not interested in selling. This is our home now." Something hardened in Vernon's expression, though his smile remained fixed. "I understand the emotional attachment that can form quickly, but I urge you to think practically. The council has the authority to condemn structures that present public safety hazards. It would be unfortunate if that became necessary." After Vernon departed, Ruth appeared from the tree line, a basket of fresh muffins in her arms, and concern etched across her face. "I see you've met Vernon," she said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a positive development. "He's been trying to get his hands on this property for years, even before Catherine disappeared." "Why?" Grace asked. "There's nothing special about this land that I can see." Ruth's gaze drifted to the cabin, then back to Grace. Catherine Blackwood wasn't just any retired engineer. She was developing something important, something that threatened the status quo. Vernon was obsessed with her work, first romantically interested in her, then fixated on controlling whatever she was building. She lowered her voice. "You should check the shed out back. That's where Catherine spent most of her time." That evening, after Alex had fallen asleep, Grace explored the weathered shed behind the cabin. Standing inside with a flashlight, she paced the interior dimensions, then walked around the exterior doing the same. Ruth was right. The inside measurements didn't match the outside. Careful examination revealed a section of the back wall that felt different when pressed. A hidden door, perfectly disguised within the wooden planks. With trembling hands, Grace applied pressure to various spots until she felt a subtle give, then a click, and a portion of the wall swung inward. Beyond lay a space that defied belief, a fully equipped laboratory carved into the hillside behind the shed and reinforced with concrete and steel. Motion-triggered lights flickered on as she entered, revealing workbenches lined with sophisticated equipment, diagrams covering the walls, and in the center, a device unlike anything she had ever seen. The circular platform, surrounded by concentric rings of metal and complex wiring, hummed with a barely perceptible vibration. Nearby control panels displayed readings and measurements that meant nothing to Grace, but the precision of the equipment spoke of importance, of purpose. On the main workbench lay a leather-bound journal. Its title page read simply, "Project Resonance Clean Energy Without Limits," and beside it, a sealed envelope addressed to the new guardian of Pine Ridge Cabin. The note inside read, "If you're reading this, you found what I worked my entire life to create. I had to leave suddenly, but I've been watching, waiting for the right person to discover my life's work. Choose wisely what you do with this knowledge. Some will try to control it, others will try to destroy it. What the world needs is someone brave enough to share it." Tirnawanakun. Grace stood frozen in the underground laboratory, surrounded by technology she couldn't begin to comprehend, feeling the weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders. She had come looking for a home and found a legacy. Outside, the lights of Vernon Miller's SUV moved slowly down the dirt road, pausing at the entrance to their property before continuing on. He wasn't finished with them. "What would you do if you discovered something that could change the world? Would you have the courage to protect it, to share it, to stand against those who would use it for the wrong reasons?" The town meeting hall buzzed with angry voices. Word had spread quickly about Grace Matthews and her son living in that death trap out on Pine Ridge Road, and concerned citizens, or at least those Vernon Miller had carefully cultivated, had turned out in force to demand action. Grace sat in the back row, feeling every judgmental stare. Alex was beside her, shoulders hunched against the hostility filling the room. Ruth Wilson sat on his other side, her gnarled hand patting his reassuringly. Joe Henderson, the hardware store owner who had become their ally, stood near the door, arms crossed in silent support. Vernon Miller stood at the podium, every inch the concerned public servant in his perfectly pressed shirt and town council pin. "The issue before us is one of public safety," he declared. "The abandoned Blackwood property presents numerous hazards. Our responsibility as a council is to protect our citizens, including those who may not recognize the dangers they face." The projector behind him displayed photos of their cabin, strategically taken to emphasize the worst damage while hiding the progress they'd made. "I move that we issue a formal notice of condemnation," Vernon continued, and prohibit occupancy until such time as the structure meets current building codes or is demolished. The murmurs of agreement from the audience made Grace's heart sink. They couldn't fight City Hall, not when Vernon Miller controlled both the council and public opinion. "If I may speak," called a voice from the side of the room. All heads turned to see Joe Henderson stepping forward. The hardware store owner was in his late 60s with work-worn hands and the kind of face that spoke of decades spent listening more than talking. "Name's Joe Henderson, for those who don't know me. Been running Henderson's Hardware for 35 years, and before that, I was Catherine Blackwood's younger brother." A shocked silence fell over the room. Even Vernon looked momentarily thrown off balance. "Catherine was no eccentric recluse," Joe continued, his weathered voice steady and sure. "She was brilliant, MIT educated, worked on the Apollo missions before she decided corporate research wasn't where she wanted to spend her life. That cabin you're so eager to condemn, she designed it herself. Built it to last centuries, not decades." Joe turned to face Vernon directly. "And she always said you were more interested in controlling her work than understanding it, Vernon. 30 years later, and nothing's changed." Before Vernon could respond, the back doors of the meeting hall swung open, and a tall, elegant woman with silver hair entered. Despite her evident age, she had to be in her mid-70s. She moved with purpose and confidence. "Catherine," Ruth Wilson whispered, her voice a mixture of shock and delight. "Catherine Blackwood." The woman strode to the front of the hall, her presence commanding instant attention. Vernon's face had gone pale, as if he were seeing a ghost. "Vernon," Catherine acknowledged with a curt nod before turning to address the room. "I understand you're discussing my property, which now rightfully belongs to Ms. Matthews. I'd like to clarify a few things." For the next 15 minutes, Catherine Blackwood systematically dismantled Vernon's case for condemnation. She presented original blueprints showing the cabin's construction exceeded modern standards in most areas. She displayed recent structural assessments conducted by licensed engineers. And most devastatingly, she revealed land surveys showing that Vernon Miller had systematically purchased properties surrounding her cabin, creating a pattern of ownership that only made sense if he knew something about the land that others did not. "The question isn't whether my cabin is safe," Catherine concluded. "The question is what Vernon hopes to find there, and why he's been trying to acquire it for 30 years. First by pursuing me romantically, then through legal intimidation, and now through this charade of public safety concerns." Vernon attempted to regain control of the meeting, but the mood had shifted. What had begun as a straightforward condemnation hearing had transformed into a public examination of Vernon Miller's motives and methods. As the council voted to table the condemnation issue pending further investigation, Catherine made her way to where Grace sat with Alex. "I believe we have much to discuss," she said quietly. "Meet me at the cabin tomorrow at sunrise. Bring your son. It's time you understood what you've inherited." Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold as Grace and Alex arrived at the cabin. Catherine Blackwood was already there, sitting calmly on the front porch steps as if she'd been waiting for decades rather than hours. "You found my journals," she said, gesturing for them to join her on the porch. It wasn't a question. Grace nodded. "And the laboratory, the device." "But not what it does," Catherine smiled. "Not yet." For the next hour, as sunlight gradually filled the clearing around the cabin, Catherine explained her life's work, a revolutionary approach to energy generation that used principles of quantum resonance to extract limitless power from what most physicists still referred to as the zero-point field, or vacuum energy. "Imagine," she said, her eyes alight with the passion of a lifetime's devotion, "energy without combustion, without radiation, without environmental destruction or resource depletion. Energy drawn from the fundamental fabric of space itself." She described how her early work with NASA had led her to theories that conventional science wasn't ready to accept. How, as her prototypes began to show promising results, interest from government and industry had transformed from skepticism to intense desire for control. Vernon Miller was working for the Department of Energy when we first met, Catherine explained. He approached me romantically, but his real interest was in acquiring my research for his department. When I refused both his personal and professional advances, he became persistent, eventually threatening. So you disappeared, Grace said, understanding now. You faked abandoning everything. Catherine nodded. I had resources saved, colleagues who believed in my work. I've spent the last 30 years continuing my research in secret locations, refining the technology, preparing it for the world. But I never stopped watching this place, waiting for the right person to find it. Why us? Grace asked. Why not release the technology yourself? Because at 75, I no longer have the energy to fight the battles this technology will face. Because the world needs to see this come from someone with nothing to gain but a better future. Catherine turned to face Grace directly. And because when I saw you bid on this cabin, a single mother willing to risk everything for a chance at something better, I recognized a spirit that wouldn't surrender to intimidation or greed. The concentric rings began to glow with a soft blue light as Catherine activated the device in her laboratory. This is just a small demonstration unit, enough to power this cabin and perhaps a dozen others like it. The commercial versions could power entire cities. With a final adjustment, the blue glow stabilized, and Catherine gestured to a standard electrical outlet mounted on the workbench. Plug in anything you like. This system will provide continuous power for approximately 50 years before any components need replacement. Grace tentatively connected her phone charger to the outlet. The charging symbol appeared instantly. Such a mundane result for such extraordinary technology. I've established a foundation, Catherine continued, with resources of approximately $5 million, the results of patents on my less revolutionary inventions. The foundation is now yours to direct, Ms. Matthews, should you choose to accept the responsibility. The legal battle came swiftly, just as Catherine had predicted. 3 weeks after the town council meeting, Grace was served with papers alleging patent infringement, trespassing on protected technologies, and unauthorized use of classified research. Vernon Miller had assembled a formidable legal team, backed by connections in the Department of Energy, who claimed Catherine's work had been developed under government contracts and was therefore federal property. The courtroom was imposingly formal. Grace sat at the defendant's table beside Margaret Chen, the patent attorney Catherine had arranged for them. Across the aisle, Vernon's legal team occupied 3 tables, their expensive suits projecting an air of inevitable victory. "Don't let them intimidate you," Margaret whispered as the bailiff called the court to order. "We have something they don't." "What's that?" Grace asked, smoothing her borrowed suit jacket. "The truth," Margaret replied, "and Catherine's meticulous documentation." For the next 6 hours, Vernon's legal team painted Catherine as a disgruntled former government contractor who had stolen classified research and Grace as her unwitting accomplice. They displayed redacted government documents, presented expert witnesses who testified that the technology Catherine claimed to have invented was theoretically impossible, and argued that any functioning device must therefore be based on stolen designs. When it was their turn, Margaret approached the bench with calm confidence. "Your Honor, rather than calling witnesses who will testify to theoretical impossibilities, we'd like to present actual evidence." She handed the judge a thick binder. This contains Catherine Blackwood's complete research notes from her first theoretical work in 1962 through her final working prototype in 2010. You'll note that every page is dated, notarized, and witnessed by independent parties. Margaret then called Catherine herself to the stand. The elderly scientist walked slowly, but with dignity, to the witness box. For the next 2 hours, she methodically dismantled the government's claims, presenting personal letters rejecting job offers from the very agencies now claiming ownership of her work. And most damning of all, Vernon Miller's own letters from the 1980s acknowledging that her technology belonged solely to her while attempting to purchase it. "And why?" Margaret asked as her final question. "Did you choose Ms. Matthews to continue your work?" Catherine's gaze found Grace in the courtroom. Because when I saw a woman willing to risk her last possession to create a home for her son, I recognized someone who understood both sacrifice and possibility. The world doesn't need another billionaire energy baron. It needs someone who remembers what it feels like to have nothing, who will ensure this technology reaches those who need it most. The judge's ruling came 3 days later. Catherine's work was her own, developed independently and without government funding. Vernon's claims were dismissed, his attempt to seize the technology through legal channels permanently blocked by judicial finding. But the victory came with a sobering warning from the bench. Ms. Blackwood, Ms. Matthews, while this court finds in your favor regarding ownership, I must caution you that powerful interests rarely surrender easily. The path you've chosen will face continued resistance. I suggest you proceed with both determination and caution. Outside on the courthouse steps, Vernon Miller approached Grace one last time. His public smile was in place, but his eyes were cold. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Some battles can't be won in courtrooms." Grace met his gaze steadily. "You're right, Vernon. This isn't about legal ownership. It's about whether technology that could help millions belongs to everyone or just to those who can afford to pay. And that's not a battle you can win anywhere." 6 months later, Pine Ridge Cabin stood transformed. The sagging porch had become a welcoming entrance, with comfortable chairs for summer evenings. The vine-covered walls now displayed the natural beauty of restored log construction. The interior had been carefully modernized while preserving Catherine's original design, with the addition of efficient appliances powered by the technology hidden beneath the shed. The Blackwood Foundation for Sustainable Energy occupied a small but growing building near the edge of the property, where Grace worked alongside Catherine, Joe, and a carefully selected team of engineers and community advocates. Their first project, providing free energy systems to an isolated rural community 50 miles north, had been completed the previous month, generating both local gratitude and national curiosity. Vernon Miller had not surrendered easily. Beyond the failed lawsuit, there had been regulatory challenges, pressure on suppliers, and whisper campaigns questioning both the technology's safety and the foundation's motives. But Catherine's decades of preparation, combined with Grace's stubborn determination and an unexpectedly supportive community, had created a foundation too strong to topple. The most serious attempt to stop them had come 3 months after the court victory, when federal agents arrived with a national security letter demanding immediate cessation of all activities. For 2 tense weeks, it seemed everything might be lost. Then Catherine's final safeguard activated, a carefully orchestrated media campaign revealing the technology's potential, complete with demonstrations in several developing countries where foundation partners had already installed systems beyond U.S. jurisdiction. The global attention made suppression impossible. What had been revealed could not be concealed again. Alex thrived in this new environment. Homeschooled now with a curriculum that combined standard education with specialized training in Catherine's techniques, he had blossomed from a quiet, careful child into an enthusiastic advocate for their work. The drawings that once depicted imaginary homes now illustrated new applications for resonance technology, each one showing both technical understanding beyond his years and the idealism that Catherine insisted was essential to responsible innovation. On this particular evening, the extended family they had created gathered on the cabin's porch to celebrate the foundation's first successful quarter. Ruth brought her famous apple pie, Joe handled the grill, and several families from the community, where they'd installed the first systems, drove in to share stories of how their lives had changed with reliable, free energy. As twilight settled over the clearing, Grace found herself standing at the edge of the property, looking back at the cabin glowing with warm light. Catherine joined her, moving more slowly these days but still sharp-eyed and determined. "Did you ever imagine this?" Grace asked, gesturing toward the gathering. "When you were building all this alone?" Catherine's smile held decades of patience, of vision sustained through isolation and doubt. "Not the details, but the purpose? Yes. I always knew this technology wasn't meant just for scientific journals or corporate profits. It was meant for porches like that, with people sharing food and making plans for something better. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching Alex demonstrate something with excited gestures to an attentive group of adults. He had his father's expressive hands, Grace thought, and something of Catherine's focused intensity when explaining complex ideas. "We've only just begun," Catherine said softly. "There will be more opposition as we expand, more powerful interests than Vernon Miller." Grace nodded, acknowledging both the warning and the implicit faith that they would prevail. "We'll face it together. That's what we do now." In the glow of sunset, with the voices of their growing community rising and falling in the background, Grace finally understood that the most valuable thing they had found in that broken-down cabin wasn't the revolutionary technology or even the financial security it promised. It was purpose, connection, the chance to build something that mattered. As they turned to rejoin the others, Grace caught sight of Michael's wedding ring, now hanging from a simple chain around her neck rather than sitting in a velvet box awaiting sacrifice. Sometimes the most precious things weren't meant to be surrendered after all, but transformed, carried forward into new beginnings that honored what came before, while embracing what might yet be. The cabin lights beckoned them back to warmth and conversation, to the sharing of ideas and possibilities, to the future they were building together. One connection at a time, one community at a time, one source of light after another in a world that so desperately needed illumination. Sometimes our greatest discoveries aren't things, but purposes. Sometimes what we find in broken places isn't treasure, but the chance to rebuild something beautiful. The cabin that had once been a desperate gamble had become the center of a mission far greater than Grace could have imagined. And as she looked at Michael's ring now transformed into a pendant, she knew that what truly mattered wasn't what we lose, but how we honor it by building something new. Sometimes our greatest discoveries aren't things, but purposes. Sometimes what we find in broken places isn't treasure, but the chance to rebuild something beautiful. What broken place in your life might be waiting for you to see its hidden potential?